back to the Soulrocker podcast, and I am your host, Vanessa Delgado. And in this episode, I am talking about why more women and even men are either deciding to have children at a much later point in their lives or not having them at all. I also will share a little bit about my personal story on why at 34 I haven't had any, and it wasn't until about a couple years ago when I became open to wanting them. And I also talk a little bit about infertility, not just the scientific reasons, but also I tap into the spirituality point of. Now, according to some research, some 44% of non-parents whose ages range from 18 to 49 say that not all likely that they will have children someday. In 1992, a study of students showed that 78% of young women plan to eventually have children, and by 2012, that number had dropped to 42%, with young men's attitudes echoing the women's choices. Now, there are many reasons, but just to name a few of why people have decided or are deciding not to have kids is things like economic insecurity. The inflation has never been what it is today, or even what it was a couple years ago. The political uncertainty, it could be medical reasons, it could be shifting gender norms and a lessening stigma around the choice to remain child-free, because oftentimes, like in the past, I think more people were having kids because they felt the pressure, because people are always talking about like, when are you gonna have kids? When are you gonna have kids? So I feel like nowadays people are starting to accept and just be like, screw it. Like, if I don't want any, I'm not gonna have any, just to please other people. I think the aspect of seeing the responsibility has also been shown to be a huge reason why people are starting to be like, nah, I want to opt out of that, because it's just way too much responsibility. Especially when one lacks support, which is another reason. Sometimes, we don't always have this big family, or a family that, even if it's small, whatever it is, that we don't feel like we can have them to support us. And support is really important, especially because, for babysitting purposes or to help you in any other, emotional support as well. And a lot of millennials, for example, like their life as it is. I've done some research where it says that, they enjoy just being a dog parent and having their freedom, having the ability to travel and pursuing more of their interest and hobbies as something that fills and fulfills their life. Also, the careers nowadays have shifted a lot to what it used to be. And I mean, there's a sense of it where people are now also working a lot from home, but the demand is a lot different than what it is to work, a regular 9 to 5 that we typically see. People who choose to be child-free tend to think a lot about it. They actually put a lot of thought behind it, and sometimes that can lead to overthinking. So that is shown to be a huge reason why a lot of people are also not having kids. And also personal reasons, like not having that motherly nurturing desire, or desiring to focus their energy towards themselves and their partner, feeling like they haven't gotten to do what they want out of their lives, and that making them feel limited. And then also, lastly, I would say it would be causes like the pandemic, climate change, and the political instability that I kind of mentioned earlier. Also, many people are becoming more aware of them experiencing trauma or mental illness, and would rather avoid having children at all than to risk passing on any of their own pain. And according to the CDC, first birth rates for women have increased from the ages of 35 to 39, that generally increased from the mid-1970s to 2012. And then there's been a steady increase for women to have also kids between the ages of 40 to 44, that later began from the from the 1980s. When we consider infertility as a big reason that many women don't have kids or struggle to have them, I did some research where it said that according to a 2015 Australian Institute of Health and Welfare report, in 2015, the average age of all women who had babies was at like 30 years. And in addition, there has been a slight decrease in women under 25 giving birth. And there has also been an increase in women over 35 giving birth. So both men and women are staying in formal education for longer periods, or the rise of women becoming business boss babes, burdened by debt, and a lot of people entering marriage and partnerships later in life. And because of that, like, they're starting obviously to have family later in life too. Now, while at the age which people are having children is increasing, and the biology of conception hasn't changed. So the chances of conception for women decrease quickly after 35. And by the age of 43, the chances of a woman conceiving with her own egg is about 5%. And then by 45, which is like just a couple years after, it decreases to 1%. So as you can see, like, it's like quick. And according to a clinic in Cleveland, 1 out of 3 infertile women have a problem with the female reproductive system. But a lot of people don't think that 1 in 3 infertile men have a problem with the male reproductive system. So it's actually pretty equal. And personally, I always consider all sides to things. Like, for example, from a point of view of spirituality, in this case, to be more specific, karmic debt. So you may hear often like, what goes around comes around, and, aka karma. But what many people don't know is like the term karmic debt, which is just that, like, it's karma but from a past life. And I mean, obviously one needs to believe in the concept of past lives in it. I even question if someone doesn't believe, like, how does that still apply to someone, But I guess I kind of say it like a point of view where just because someone is in a room from someone else that is in another room, right? Just because you can't see or understand something, that doesn't mean that it's not happening in the other room. It's kind of like what sometimes I think, like, just because maybe people don't necessarily think that karmic debt exist, and that, like, they don't understand or are aware, or they completely just don't vibe with the whole, like, past lives. Like, does that actually exclude those people that don't believe it just because they don't, So it's just like kind of like a thought, because I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not necessarily saying it. I personally believe in karmic debt and past lives. Karmic debt describes something that occurred in past life that you're now making amends for it in this lifetime. So, like, essentially we all have karmic debt from past life, and maybe in this life you are quote unquote paying for it. But the thing is like, one has free will choice on what they create in this life. Like, are you creating or paying of more? So, like, another key point to karmic debt or karma in general is not necessarily the misconception of all karma is, like, quote unquote bad. I think the thing is that karma is technically both good and bad. Like, it's a neutral thing, and it essentially is always, like, at play. Essentially, like, there are always opportunities for mastery, that for us to master it, and that presents itself and all the time in our lives. Just like any pattern, these, incomplete karmic debt, or also also some people call it like cycles, like karmic cycles, because they repeat themselves until we, like, learn to master them. And often they turn into these, like, habits, and if you don't cultivate self-awareness, like, it just becomes something that you do, but it doesn't mean that it's supposed to be. So you'll just end up accumulating more and more incomplete karma with time. So if you look at things from, like, a point of view of karmic debt and infertility issues, let's say. So for example, like, if you think of it like through trauma and reproductive organ issues, right? Your soul may be carrying a traumatic experience into this life. So like, let's just say in a past life, your insides were like torn into bit and pieces, like you were in some kind of war, or let's just say like in a past life you were stabbed to death. Well, that creates like a huge impact from that trauma that like it doesn't, and because you most likely die from it, you don't actually learn or have the ability to solve that and heal that aspect. So essentially, like, there's a part of that you bring over into this life, like into the next lifetime. Doesn't necessarily mean this one, but just into like another lifetime. And so what happens is, it could be like if something would be related to this, for example, into infertility, let's just say that with like one of your past lives, and then you come into this life, and now you struggle with having infertility issues. Essentially, it could be something along the lines, or like, for example, let's think of it through like an abortion, right? So like, let's just say that in a past life you had an abortion. And I just want to make something clear that like, abortions aren't necessarily an quote unquote like evil thing. Often our soul and the soul of the baby most likely had an agreement to create this debt in order to learn and grow as a soul level. Like, often that's why abortions happen, is because of that. And so what creates the main, debt is a lack of self-forgiveness for your actions. Like, that's what tends to be the worst thing, because you already made like an agreement with this child that, wasn't born, but like in another realm, you made this contract with them. And so like, it's already been technically forgiven by them. It doesn't say that like it would hurt to like ask for their forgiveness, but more than anything, it's about forgiving yourself. And that's like one of the key things that like I want people to understand. And many women will carry so much guilt and shame and anger, even like men, that, it obviously still affects men, not just the women. And because abortions was their own, like, they hold so much of these negative feelings, and maybe, their only real resolution for the best outcome of where their lives were at the time. Like, that's why they made that decision. It's not always for like selfish reasons. Like, there could be a million reasons why you decide to have an abortion, and it's like quote unquote like okay. And they don't realize that carrying a heavy secret alone is something that can really play big, and carrying so many negative feelings contains this energy to prevent you from healing. And being able to make peace with yourself and making a connection with this unborn child, and honor them to, no matter the choices that, was important. Also, like, if we considering a non-karmic debt, right, but like still in the middle of the spiritual or like psychological point of view, the emotional layer of one's well-being with the subconscious mind is that the subconscious rules emotions. Now, the subconscious mind is where like habits, imagination, memories, and intuition exist. So like, many women have spent a significant portion of their lives trying not to get pregnant. Like, the subconscious mind has accepted this desire and has embedded this belief for so long that it takes a while to switch gears. So like, if you, for whatever reason, you wanted to prevent that for so long, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I'm ready, and then it doesn't happen right away, like, it doesn't mean that it won't necessarily happen. It's just sometimes it can take a while. And this is where like sometimes you go to your doctor and they don't really understand or can tell you something like that. And like, emotional stress can have an unintentional impact on our reproductive desires. So it could be like a vicious cycle. And I mean, yeah, there's plenty of women who have a lot of stress in their lives and they still get pregnant, right? But like, the thing is that everyone is so different, and the lessons and experiences for their soul to evolve is different from each person. And we don't know what all the other factors current from either their past life and their current life, what people are dealing with. And so like, often comparing ourselves to other women, like, it doesn't serve us any kind of a purpose. And according to research, there are several subconscious blocks that can like impede fertility. And oftentimes, like when we think of like past sexual abuse or trauma, can obviously like it could wreak havoc with emotional well-being, which impacts fertility later on in life. And likewise, past abortions or miscarriages can also negatively impact the subconscious, right? So like maybe you were pregnant and like as a teen and you had an abortion or you had a miscarriage for whatever reason. And later on in life, like you decide, okay, now I'm ready. And for whatever reason, like it's not happening. And it's not because, oh, like God is like trying to punish you. It's just like you're actually holding on to a lot of different like negative feelings that you're not allowing you. It's like this negative energy is within you that you haven't cleared. And so it's going to be difficult for you to sometimes, for some people, to, you know, be fertile. And like as a child, the world is experienced through the subconscious lens. So any type of family dysfunction from the family of origin can also impact fertility. Lastly, and like most commonly, many women experiencing infertility suffer from the gift of perfectionism. And I think that that's something that's overlooked, and we don't realize that that kind of energy plays a huge role on so many levels as to why could be causing this blockage for us to get pregnant. Now, I want to talk about my personal experience. So as a kid, I remember playing like mom and baby, you know. I had this real life looking doll at one point that I literally took everywhere. And I felt this need to protect the baby and nurture it. I remember going into the grocery store with my grandparents, and I had my baby sitting on like the stroller that my mom bought me. And people sometimes would actually take like a double look because on occasions people thought it was real. And like just the way that I covered the baby with a little blanket while it was in the stroller, and like the way that I walked carefully with the stroller, and the way that I would take the baby out, like just like any mother would, you know. When I share anything about my family, like here's something, like when I share anything about my family, like I don't care what it is, I just want to make it clear that like I'm not doing it to make them sound or look bad, but what I want to do is I want to express the awareness and give myself like a voice. It isn't to put blame on them. It's just like these are feelings that are still valid in their experiences. I just like really want to address that from an early age. And like there's a whole story background on this, but for the sake of this episode, essentially there was this message sent to me whenever I was behaving or like not being perfect, when I was behaving bad or like not being perfect. And the message was like, I was bad, therefore God will punish me with a kid who's 10 times worse than me when I have my own kids. And like this is stuff that was literally said to me practically in those words. Obviously not word for word, but like you guys get what I'm saying. And I was also often told that I was selfish, which made me believe that I was therefore my subconscious mind kept me in that place of not wanting to give any of myself or energy to a baby because of the responsibilities that it takes, and because I thought that I was selfish. And I think throughout my life, like I didn't want to be a single mother. You know, having experienced what it was to have my parents split when I was little, and me not having a father around definitely played an impact on thinking about that sort of thing and not wanting to go through that myself. Not for myself or for my kid, if I had one. And I also felt I lost this connection of motherhood that I once had with my play baby. And I think because I always felt like my mom never had a connection with me, and this is just how I feel, that it was hard for me to have that like model to me, and that I could feel that way towards somebody else. Like I like needed that. I have known so many women around me who have always like were struggling in so many ways financially, or, you know, because of support. I knew that I didn't have a stable job for a long time. Even when I did have a stable job, I was like, well, this is not necessarily the job that I want. And so like, I didn't want to put responsibility on my parents. In this case, like my mom, really, because she was the main person who I trusted or who could who I could count on. And because that meant in a way that I would be continuing the cycle that sort of happened to me, because, you know, a lot of people I noticed that were like putting their responsibility on their parents. And that's something sort of that happened to me in a way. So I was just like, I don't want to continue something like that cycle. Even though I was not aware of all the psychological like things that I am now, but I did know that if I considered having a baby, that I wanted to be with a person who not just would provide, even if things didn't work out between us, but that they would take responsibility as a mature father to have the respectful co-parent relationship, because I didn't have that. I grew up with a cousin who I was really close to, and I saw how she struggled a lot because she had a father who was emotionally unavailable. And the only thing that was present really was the physical body. And I realized how important it was to not just have a dad around physically, but also provide good emotional support, to be encouraging of each phase of a kid's life, to show love through affection and through the words. And the boyfriends that I had, I didn't quite see that in them. And I often felt like I was still a kid myself. Like I even when I was in my mid-20s, I just didn't feel like I was capable of having and raising a kid. And I would think, like, how does a parent know how to contact to sign them up for school? Or like, how do they know where to go and like who to call, like with medical things and all the big important things that just like literally scared me to death. Hearing so many people make comments about, when are you gonna have kids? Or when people asked if I had any, and I would say no, people would look at me like just weird. And then what would confuse me would be like, one minute it's like they're saying like, oh, you'll regret it if I don't, you know, because oftentimes like I would confess like, well, I don't really know that I want kids. And then, you know, the like scared, like tell me like, oh, but you know, you want them because they're so great, and like you'll regret it if you don't later in life, and all this other stuff. And the next minute they're like, oh, but don't have me, because they're like, you know, just saying a whole bunch of like negative things that were like essentially scaring me. So I'm like, I wouldn't actually say anything to these people, but I'd be like, what is it? Like, what? I don't understand why people are like giving me like these flip-flop as like advice and comments, you know. And there was a point where the confusion led me to start researching on other women who potentially felt like the way that I did, because I began to feel out of place, because most people around me like have kids, or they were talking about eventually having them, and here I was like didn't have any, and was just like, I don't think that I want them. So I began to question like, well, what's wrong with me? And especially as I was getting closer to when I was turning 30, I was like really questioning myself. And it made me feel this pressure on making like this final decision by 30. Like I had to make a final decision by then, is what it felt like. And what I found was like, there were many women who felt like I did, you know, that I could relate to. And a lot of the things that like I have already mentioned, but also like I found other reasons that I sort of began to like, I guess you can say, adopt as my own personal reasons. So that was something that like kind of happened to me too, because I began to see other reasons that were really, really smart and like valid. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, it's like I sort of began to like adopt those into being my reasons, when they kind of weren't. Like, there were valid reasons that I respected, but not all of them necessarily like were my reasons. And it wasn't until about 3-4 years ago, when I began therapy, that I started to reconsider everything. In the last 2 years is when I discovered that while all those reasons like were valid, and you know, they still played like a huge role, I think that they served the purpose of me maintaining myself from not having kids, which was, I do believe that like has been a really good choice and decision, because I feel like I would have definitely made the wrong choice for the wrong reasons if I had them. But one thing I had not realized was the intensity of fear that that was placed on this confusion. And so how deeply the subconscious messages that were sent to me by my mother also affected me. And there was a part of me that deep down that I knew that I had to overcome certain things and heal certain things for me to be ready to birth another human. And I truly believe that if I had not listened to that intuition, despite, what I did or didn't know or didn't understand, that I would have continued a cycle that deep down, I knew that I was supposed to stop. And the more that I began to dive deep into myself, my upbringing, and forgiving myself for certain things, understanding and becoming aware of things so that I would not pass that on to anyone, was when I realized that I do want to be. Becoming a mom to me doesn't need to be necessarily birthing my own child, even though I want to experience that. I would love it. But at the same time, I can't control if the other person that I'm with will also want them, especially if we have a different age range, that it may not happen. But I would love to experience the moment that one finds out that she's pregnant, and getting creative on how I would share that with the loved ones, sharing that special moment with the father of the baby and hoping to put a surprising smile on his face, and the enthusiasm on the process of one goes through when a woman is pregnant, and having the ability to speak to my baby while in my belly with kind, loving affirmations, playing music and connecting on an energetic level to form a special bond is something that in the last couple of years I've considered and really holds a precious image. And I realized the fear of failing as a mother has been so deep that I just because the fear of that has been so deep that I rejected it instead. To fail as a mother seemed so much more worse for me to admit and hold that than to reject it. It just felt easier and better to just reject and be I don't. The fear that I would make my baby feel unlovable or unseen or unwanted I was something that scared me. That I would make so many mistakes and them have to spend a lifetime having to cope and heal. That I would, if I, would I pick the right person to be their dad? How would other family members of mine or from the father side of the family treat my baby? Would I be able to teach them all the really important things for them to have a happy life and for them to turn out to be kind humans? Would I be actually and do something and then for someone or even my child to be you're selfish, thinking that would be something that, what if I did something that would make me selfish and I wouldn't be self-aware? How scary would that be? Or would I love my child unconditionally and not project anything of mine onto them? Those were all really, really intense fears that I didn't even want to look at. And instead, I just rejected the idea of having a baby. And once I began discovering the fears that I sort of masked, and I began to integrate the projections of society's message of this fear that the responsibility a child brings, and that you're your life is over, and nobody's gonna want you, or you are never going to be able to sleep, and you're never going to be able to enjoy your life ever again. All those fears that yeah, to some degree it's true, but I also think that everyone is different. If a woman doesn't know how to manage her time well, obviously she will struggle a lot more. She'll likely to be yeah, I just never have time to myself. Well, maybe you just don't know how to, it's just little things like that. I'm not saying that they're not going to take up a lot of your time, because I definitely are. But who's to say that like every single person out there feels that way? And for people to project that onto me like isn't really fair. Like each experience as a mother is like different. And I feel like the message about how soon or at what age one is supposed to have children is like BS. Like if somebody has the ability and feels connected and feels like capable and has like the right partner at like 25, then like go for it. But like not everyone has that. And also I began to discover a really deep rooted fear that I had not recognized, which is, I believe if I dig deeper, I may find it's part of my past life. But the fear of this feeling that I wouldn't be able to have kids. And this, I mean, like this episode is long enough, and I feel like there's a layer in that as well to work through. What, like, because it's like, why would I have those feelings or fears? You know, where is that coming from? Like, what's the root of that? And I don't necessarily know that there's one that makes logical sense from my experiences in this lifetime. You know, this is like my assumption. And also, like, what I realize is the more negativity and energy I place on this dissatisfaction, or anyone really, like this dissatisfaction or worry or disappointment of the outcome of, you know, like perhaps the way financially I expected or thought my life would be like by a certain age, or, you know, the same thing, this like maybe expectation, whether it's formed from society or even myself, of what like how my partner was supposed to be, and was I supposed to be like married or like living together with somebody at this point in life, like, or feeling shame for what society, you know, drags and brags to what everyone's life should look like, which is a sense of, which to me, like what I've discovered is like a sense of, it's being driven by control. Like we're trying to control all these outcomes. And I know for me, like that's really big, is trying to control. Like that's where a lot of my anxiety comes from, is from this like unknown thing that I can't control about like the future. What we need to do is often soften those expectations, surrender to the process, and trust. Makes me think of like, I can't say his name, Deepak Chopra, I think, where it's like, he says, between point A and point B, there's a million ways to get there. Your job is just to focus on knowing and feeling the certainty that you will get there. And treating your body like the place and the palace that it is, and that it will support you back. And your body knows how to do this. Because essentially, as a woman who's, you know, we carry the same things, and it, you know, having a baby and birthing a baby has been something that has been happening for centuries, eons, you know. And so like not placing a worry of like, will my body be able to do it, like is a worry and like a sense of like not trusting ourselves and like God for this to happen.